All right, so today we are going to talk about hormones and weight loss. And so, what I think will be helpful with this is it's probably going to be a bit of a different approach than what you've heard in the past in terms of weight loss. So, if the message you've heard in the past is essentially eat less, move more, the good news is, and especially if that hasn't worked for you or that's felt very hard to do, the good news is a lot of the research shows that's really not what is beneficial. There's a great book called The Obesity Code that really goes into the research around this and how just reducing calories and eating these very low calorie diets, yes, you'll get some results, but as far as long-term, something that's sustainable, something that really feels good for our body, that's really not the way to go. So instead, what we want to look at ultimately is how are the foods that we're eating affecting hormones? And specifically, we're going to talk about the hormone insulin. So really quick, what are hormones? Hormones are our body's messengers. So hormones are released in one part of the body, and then they go through our bloodstream, and they're telling our body to do something essentially. So in the case of insulin, which is the main one we want to focus on right off the bat in terms of weight loss, insulin is released from the pancreas. And then insulin's job is it is telling our body to take up any extra sugar. So when we eat carbohydrates, any carbohydrate from a sweet potato to jelly beans, our body breaks that down into something called glucose. And glucose in our bloodstream, we can only have so much. So when the body notices we have too much, insulin is released, and it's going to store that as something called glycogen in our liver and in our muscle cells. Now, the problem with this, because insulin is wonderful, we want it. If you know anybody with type 1 diabetes, you know that it's a bad thing if we don't have it. They have to take a shot of insulin to make sure that they don't, go into like a diabetic coma or worse. So insulin is good, but when we have too much insulin, not only is it telling our body to store up extra sugar, but it's then saying, well, we certainly don't need any of this extra fat. So it's then storing the fat that we're eating, and it's really preventing our body from being able to tap into our stored fat and start to break it down and burn it for fuel. So you can think of it as a storage hormone. And so yes, we want it, we need it, but the key is that we want to reduce how much insulin we have being released. We want our body to be very sensitive to it so that we only need a little bit, and it's able to get the job done, and then it's able to kind of get back out of our bloodstream so that our body can start to turn towards fat stores and other things for fuel. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what are the things that cause insulin to spike up? So there's three main things I want to talk about. One is just eating too much. So this is, again, where that hunger scale can be so important. When we eat these really big meals, we overeat. That is when, we dump all this energy into our body, and our body's going to release a lot of insulin to try to take care of that. And that's where a lot of times, you can feel really kind of sluggish, tired, overly full after eating a really big meal. So again, paying attention to that hunger scale is huge. The next thing is eating too frequently. So really the main thing here is being careful of snacking, mindless snacking throughout the day. So you might have heard, you need to eat 5 to 6 small meals per day in order to lose weight. The good news is you really can do it however it works for you. You can lose weight eating 2 meals per day. You can lose weight eating 5 to 6 small meals a day. So you decide what works for you and your lifestyle and your preferences. But either way, what you want to be careful of is, again, just that snacking in between, because every time we eat, we get a little spike of insulin. And then again, we want to give it a chance to come back down and kind of flush out of our system, so to speak, so that we're not in that storage mode, so that we can actually start to reverse that process and burn our stored fat and lose weight. So again, pick how many meals. We're going to go into this in week number 4, I believe, when we get into planning, 3 or 4. But for now, again, just really paying attention to your planned meals and not snacking between. That can be huge. And then, of course, the obvious is what we're eating, right? So the sugar, the flour, the really refined carbohydrates, because they are kind of pre-processed or pre-digested, you can think of it, outside of the body. When we eat them, we're going to get a very high insulin response, right? Because it dumps sugar into our bloodstream so quickly. So refined sugars, white flours are the 2 things that have been shown to have the biggest response. And then foods that, proteins and healthy fats, complex carbohydrates are going to have a much slower response. So the nice thing about this is it's one thing that you can focus on that can have a huge impact. So if you start to eliminate or at least greatly reduce the sugar and the flour and the processed carbs, you're going to see not just weight loss, but you most likely start to feel a lot better. Energy levels will get better. Hunger levels should get better and all of that. So the reason for that is when our insulin levels are kind of constantly going up and down, right? So you eat a meal. Let's just go through a scenario. Let's say you wake up and you eat, a coworker brings donuts to work. So you have a couple donuts, right? Spikes insulin, and then insulin is your body's going to respond really quickly. Insulin's going to crash back down. But what happens then, we start to feel tired, hungry, and so we grab the next thing, right? So we grab, some sort of snack or something, maybe a granola bar or something like that, that again is going to cause this spike, and then it drops back down. Then we, have lunch, and we're eating, again, a lot of processed carbohydrates. And so it's this constant up and down throughout the day that's keeping our body in storage mode, keeping our energy levels kind of all over the place. If you notice that you get like energy dips in the afternoon, or you just feel exhausted in the evening, that can be what's going on. It's just this kind of constant roller coaster with insulin levels, okay? So again, when we're eating these types of things, we get this quick burst of energy, but then it's like putting paper to fire. It goes out very, very quickly, right? And then eventually we crash and burn, and we're constantly relying on these quick hits of carbs to keep us going, right? Whereas if we are burning fat for fuel, you'll notice that your energy is more steady, your hunger is more steady, and you can go longer periods of time without eating and be okay. So again, most of us, when we start off, we're kind of in this roller coaster cycle of constantly needing carbohydrates to fuel us, and we really want to try to reverse that. Okay, so that comes to then, what is the solution? And on some level, you probably already know, right? So the first thing is we want to try to move towards eating more foods that do not create a high insulin response. So vegetables are your best friend because they are chock full of vitamins and minerals and fiber. They create a very, very small insulin response. So veggies are, a superfood that we can include in every meal if we want to, and also help us feel fuller. Healthy fats are going to be huge. Of the 3 macronutrients, fats are the one that have the least or create the least insulin response. So, having those healthy fats in your diets, nuts, seeds, even cheese, things like that can help you feel fuller, help you feel satiated, but not create that insulin response. Protein is going to be important. Now, protein breaks down into something called amino acids, and amino acids can actually convert into glucose. So you don't need to overdo the protein, right? Just some, natural sources of protein will be fine. You don't need to necessarily go out and buy a bunch of protein powder or do protein bars and all that kind of stuff, but certainly including proteins and making sure you have that in your meals and in your diet is going to be very helpful. Some grains, there's a sheet that you're going to be able to download here called What the Bleep Should I Eat? And it goes into all of this in a lot more detail, and it lists out specific things and recommended portion sizes and all of that. But some grains can even be fine, and fruits are great because, especially eating whole fruits, you're getting, again, like with the vegetables, you're getting the vitamins and the minerals and the fiber, which really slows down. So even though sugars are in fruits, because they are combined with the fiber, they are not going to create a major insulin response like processed carbohydrates are, or other sugars. So as I mentioned, including some healthy fats. Again, if you go on to that What the Bleep Should I Eat worksheet, it lists out a bunch of different options of things that would fall into that fat category. But the great thing about healthy fats is they also include something called omega-3 fatty acids, which can help to decrease inflammation. There's a lot of really great health benefits with that. So besides the fact that it is going to help you feel fuller, also fats taste good. So if we're taking out those sugars and replacing them with fats, it can be really, really helpful with some of those cravings and things like that. And then we're getting the benefit of those omega-3s. Again, avoiding that unplanned snacking. So you can have as many meals as you want throughout the day, but you just want to make sure that that's what you're eating and that's it. And then you're not grabbing stuff here and there. Those little grabs here and there may not seem like a big deal, but they can really add up. And again, they're kind of keeping that the insulin levels high when we want to give our body chances between meals to bring them back down. The other thing is extending periods of non-eating. So I talk with my clients a lot about intermittent fasting. And essentially, really what that is just giving our body periods of time when we're not eating. Now, we do this every night when we sleep, right? And in that time, our body is having to, our insulin levels are dropping and our body's having to turn to stored fat typically during those periods of time. And so really when we think about like intermittent fasting or extending periods of non-eating, we're just giving our body a little bit more time to do that. So a lot of people, and I'm not suggesting at this point that you start doing intermittent fasting at all, but for some people, they'll start off in the morning just extending when they eat their first meal by a bit, because first thing in the morning, your body is typically in a state where it's fat adapted, which we're going to talk about in a minute. It's burning fat because you've been sleeping all night. You haven't given it any food. And so if we're conscious about it, we're not just skipping breakfast and then overeating later on, we can sort of extend those periods of time. Now, what I would recommend is just giving yourself a cutoff time in the evening. I think that's a really good, easy starting point for most people. You can decide when that is, but let's just say it's, 8 o'clock at night. You're just saying, okay, after 8 o'clock, I'm not going to eat. And it's not because everything you eat after 8 o'clock turns into fat, but because you're allowing those insulin levels to come down, then you're going to, be going to sleep. And so you're giving yourself this nice extended period of time of non-eating. Then down the road, if you start to notice your hunger levels getting more regulated and you want to experiment with just pushing your first meal back a little bit, you can. But that's what I would just start off with, is just being conscious about it. Okay, so when I talk about this term, fat adaptation, essentially our body can get energy from two places: carbohydrates or glucose, and then fats. And so both of those are good. We're not trying to go on some low carb diet necessarily, but what we're trying to do is kind of retrain our body how to burn fat for fuel. And I think of it as like cranking up a factory. So burning fat for fuel, fat is a very energy dense source of fuel for our body. When we eat fats, we're getting 9 calories per gram versus carbohydrates, we only get 4. So fat is this really energy dense source. I compare it to the difference between eating a grape and eating an avocado, right? If I eat a grape, it's really easy. I don't have to do anything, but then obviously it's not going to last very long. Whereas if an avocado, I have to peel it, I got to get the seed out. It takes a little bit more time to get that energy, but it's going to last longer. And that's kind of the same thing that's going on here. So fat adapted just means that our body is able to start to tap into those fat stores that we have. That is why we store fat. You don't have to have extra fat. Every human being, the reason we're storing fat, one of the main reasons, is to use during times of not eating, right? So again, it's almost like we're teaching our body how to re-crank up that system. And so when we do the things we just discussed, we start to change out our food, we start to eat foods that don't cause such a high insulin response, we give our body periods of time, it was going to relearn how to become fat adapted and start burning, again, its own fat for fuel, right? So it's learning how to dine in, as one of my coaches says, and tap into those beautiful fuel sources that we carry on us. And then, of course, if your goal is weight loss, that's a beautiful side effect of getting in fat adapted. The other things, as you can see here, you'll start to notice your hunger levels go down. You have more energy. You might notice more mental clarity. Cravings start to decrease greatly. So you can kind of pay attention when you start to notice those things. In addition to weight loss, then your body's really becoming fat adapted once again. One of the things I highly recommend, and I'm going to put another link here so that you guys can watch the trailer, That Sugar Film. This is a really good documentary. It's very entertaining. It's not too long. It's on Amazon Prime, but it really does a great job of explaining all this in a little bit more detail. It has some great, illustrations and things like that to really drive it home. So if you're somebody that, especially that enjoys the science piece of it, this film does it in a really, really great way that just makes a lot of sense without you walking away feeling, either freaked out or super guilty or anything like that. It just, I always think, when we understand what's going on, it can be really helpful in terms of making changes and making choices. So I highly recommend this. Again, it's very entertaining and it's not too long and it's free if you have Amazon Prime. So check that out. That'll give you some additional information around some of the stuff that we talked about today. But the main thing I would say taking away with this is just, if you can focus on reducing the sugar in the flour, just because that's a simple thing to focus on right off the bat, it's going to have such a huge impact. Give yourself about 4 to 6 weeks. Some people respond much quicker. Some people, it takes a little bit of time, but give yourself that 4 to 6 week period to sort of allow your body to start adjusting and getting into that state of fat adaptation. But that can be incredibly powerful and beneficial thing to do. So good luck with all of that. I hope you guys find this helpful.